Setting up an Angular 2 application can be somewhat laborious. Before we begin, let's list the required steps. Then we'll look at ways we can set up Angular without actually performing all of these steps. But to manually set up an Angular 2 application, we'd need to create an application folder, add package definition and configuration files, install the packages, create the application's root Angular module, because every Angular application needs at least one Angular module, then create the main.ts file to load that Angular module, and create the host web page, normally index.html. Luckily, we have some options. We can manually perform each of these steps. The detailed instructions for each step are provided in the Angular documentation at Angular.io. Or we can simply download the result of these quick start steps from GitHub. Alternatively, we could use tooling such as Angular CLI. Angular CLI is a command line tool for generating the setup files and boilerplate code for an Angular 2 application, including scaffolding the unit and end-to-end tests. The Angular CLI can be found here. We'll look more at the CLI when we revisit setup later in this course. To keep the grunt work for our sample application to a minimum, I've prepared another option, starter files. I've created the initial files we need for our Angular 2 application. These files are available in my GitHub repository. In addition to the basic setup files for an Angular 2 application, the starter files include extra files we need as we build our sample application. So let's go with this option. I've navigated to my GitHub repository following the URL from the slide. If you are comfortable with Git, you can clone this repository. Otherwise, click this button to download all of the files as a single zip file. The APM final folder contains the completed code for our sample application. Use these files if you want to see the end result. The APM start folder contains the starter files. These are the files we will use as the starting point for building our Angular 2 application. After downloading the files, copy or extract the files in the APM start folder to a working directory called just APM. Your APM folder should then look like this. Now let's open the APM folder with a code editor. I've opened the APM working folder in my selected editor, VS Code. First, let's talk about the directory structure. By convention, all of the files specific for our application are under a folder called app. We only have a few folders and files here now, but we'll add more as we progress through this course. For applications of any size, we'll have subfolders under the app folder for each major feature in the application. These are the setup files. To get us going quickly, we won't dive into these files now. We'll learn what these files are, what they contain, and what they do in the Angular 2 Setup Revisited module later in this course. So the last thing we need to do is install all of the libraries required to develop and run our application. Open a command prompt or terminal. Be sure it is set to the root folder for the application, which should be the working directory we named APM. Type npm install. This installs all of the libraries we need, including the libraries to run the application, such as Angular, and for development, such as TypeScript. Note that you may see some warnings and errors during this installation process, like these. In most cases, you can ignore them. If you see something like this tree structure at the end, the install completed successfully. Note that you may see different version numbers than what I have here. If it ended with an error, try running npm install a second time. That often completes the installation. Going back to the editor, notice that we now have a Node Modules folder here. This is where npm installed all of our libraries. And we have a typings folder where it installed the TypeScript definition file we needed. We talk more about TypeScript definition files in the Angular 2 Setup Revisited module. Now that we have everything installed, let's try running the sample application.